Hello, and welcome to the first and potentially last of the journal entries for creating a new game called wasmCloud Frontiers. wasmCloud Frontiers is a player-generated content game of random collaboration, resource and construction strategy, and tower defense. So first, why Frontiers? First of all, naming is hard, and I had nothing to do with coming up with this name, which is probably why I like it so much. There's also a double meaning to the term frontier. Frontier is either an extreme limit of unsettled land, which is of course referring to the plot of the game that I'll get into in a minute, and it also refers to an extreme limit of understanding or achievement. And part of the goal of this game is to educate and give people some training in a bunch of different languages and game design and game development, as well as wasmCloud, of course. So what does developer-generated content mean? There's a term in the game industry called player-generated content, and I'm sure you're familiar with Minecraft. Minecraft is a pretty classic example of player-generated content. But you can also do Minecraft mods that let you do pretty much anything you can imagine in Minecraft. I've even seen mods that let you run Kubernetes clusters within Minecraft, and if you hit one of your sheep with a hammer, it actually turns off or kills one of your scheduled processes. Roblox is a game engine editor, and almost a game universe as well. Players can make their own games and other interactive activities, and they can publish and advertise them, and I believe there's also a number of different ways to monetize the player-generated content there. And of course, the ancestors of all player-generated content are the MUDs, the MUCs, the MOOs, the MUSHES, and all the other fantastic acronyms. In a classic text-based MUD, which was a multiplayer game you played over Telnet back in the good old days, in a classic MUD, once a player became a wizard, they reached the maximum player level, they could choose to then become a coder and build a castle or an area in the game, and that's how the game's content was generated. Once the players graduated to a certain level, they were then able to produce the game's own content. And I've always been fascinated by this concept and have always wanted to build player-generated content games. I've never really been satisfied being a pure consumer, and I feel constantly compelled to produce as well as consume. And a player or developer-generated content game is that sweet spot of both consumption and production. So the game has a couple of design goals. There's very few design goals, but they're important. The first is that developers learn wasmCloud through play. As much fun as games in general are, and building games is to me, this still needs to be related to wasmCloud in some fashion. So by building the content for this game, I want developers to be able to learn the ins and outs of wasmCloud so that they can then take that knowledge and move it to the enterprise or wherever else they're working. The game is online, and players are all interconnected. The game should support network partitions, which means occasional disconnects and low or poor connectivity scenarios. Finally, even though it's number 4, I think it should probably be the most important, which is making the game must be as fun as playing the game. Now, this is a hypothetical list of getting started. The game obviously hasn't been written yet, since I've just now sat down to start documenting the journey. But the goal is you'll go to frontiers.wasmcloud.dev, you'll sign up, you can generate a seed key, and when you create a frontier, you'll give us the public key. And this public-private key isn't just for security, it's also to get you used to the concept of some of these asymmetric verification patterns and decentralized security that are pervasive throughout wasmCloud and its tooling. Then you'll start the Frontiers capability provider on the host on your machine. You'll start the hero actors in your host, and more about what those are in a bit. You'll set link definitions, and again, starting providers, starting actors, and defining link definitions are the three most common activities of anybody running wasmCloud on their machine. And then you'll monitor your Frontiers progress online at the Frontiers website. In other words, you'll be able to go to the main website, pick your Frontier, and then watch as your actors are running around doing whatever it is you've programmed them to do. And you'll also be able to monitor the actors in your local wasmCloud dashboard. Again, this is planned and doesn't yet exist, so if you try that URL now, you will more than likely get nothing. So the gameplay is fairly simple. Frontier Hero is a wasmCloud actor, and it's been signed with the wasmCloud Frontiers capability contract. And if you're not all that familiar with what a capability contract is or what capability providers are, there's a link here in this slide. Heroes are able to harvest, which means they can extract resources from the environment. They're able to move, they're able to build, and they're able to tear down. And through those four simple primitives, your heroes are able to do the things that they need to do in order to see you through to your gameplay goals. And we'll get a little bit into the gameplay goals in a minute. One of the other hopefully interesting twists that I have planned for the game is that at random a wormhole will appear swallowing one of your heroes, which remember is a wasmCloud actor, from your Frontier and depositing it somewhere else. And at the same time, someone else's hero has been abducted and then placed into your Frontier. So in short, it's an actor swap. And eventually, if enough wormholes have visited your Frontier, then over time your your Frontier may actually be defended entirely by heroes that were coded by other developers. And those developers may no longer even be online. Players have a maximum of 4 heroes that they can use at any given time to defend the Frontier, which means your actor count will be limited to 4 in your host. Or at least it'll be limited to 4 that can be bound to your Frontier's capability provider at any given time. So every good game needs an antagonist, and in that vein we have a horde that will appear seeking to make its way through your Frontier's outer defenses to raid and ransack the storage silo located in the center of your Frontier. The storage silo is the lifeblood of your Frontier citizens, and as you may have guessed, this is where you will essentially have essential stores that will be depleted through each horde raid. And so it's your job to keep those stores filled by harvesting the resources and to defend the resources that are in that silo. And so, as the slide says, if your heroes have done their jobs, the attack will be repelled. If not, your citizens may end up going hungry. So let's talk a little bit about the desired architecture. Again, this is all hypothetical and subject to change. In the next episode, I may completely decide to do something else, but this is the plan for now. My typical approach to planning is that I plan just enough to get started. I have, in my experience, the further down the road you plan, the less reliable those plans are. And so I like to plan just enough to get me going, and then once I get started, I will learn enough to plan a little bit more. So the architecture here is the wasmCloud host runtime, which is, again, the whole purpose of this is to not only stress test the wasmCloud host runtime to make sure that it's capable of doing this, but to give people a fun way of being introduced to the host runtime. There's the central website, so the website that doesn't yet exist, the Frontier's capability provider, which amounts to the game engine that runs on your machine, your hero actors, and you can have as many of them as you like and build an entire fleet of them. You can only deploy 4 of them into your Frontier at any given time. And then the message broker that provides the connectivity for wasmCloud's lattice functionality and your connectivity to the Frontier's main central backend is all done through NATS and NGS. And if you're curious about what NATS is, you can just go to nats.io and check that out. And again, architecture diagram, this is a work in progress and should be taken with a grain of salt, but this is sort of how I'm envisioning things today. We have the Frontier's website, player wasmCloud hosts that are running heroes and the Frontier's provider. The central website will be responsible for provisioning a new Frontier, and when you provision this new Frontier, we will generate the terrain and allocate resources and essentially perform a little Big Bang on the micro universe that you're going to get. The central website will also monitor lattice events so that we can determine aggregate state. It'll monitor Frontier events so that we can display the state of everyone's Frontier, and it will do Frontier state retention so that our state cache is persistent, so that the central website could potentially go down and come back up, and we'll still be able to pull back snapshots so that we can then regenerate the state. We'll also be able to display, query, sort, and filter the various Frontiers so that we can show you the ones that are connected, the ones that are under attack, the ones that might be running low on resources, and so on. All to make for, hopefully, an enjoyable experience for those both playing the game by writing code and those consuming the game by sort of watching the leaderboard on the Frontier's website. So the Frontier itself, each player is going to be given a grid of 50 by 50 squares. This number was arbitrarily picked, and once we have enough information to start doing balance, that grid may shrink or grow, but we need to start with a straw man somewhere, and so a 50-50 grid seemed like a decent place to start. The center set of squares is the Frontier's resource silo, the target that the enemies are always seeking. And again, the hordes are trying to steal the food and other resources from your silo. The resources that you can harvest on the map include wood, grain, dairy, meat, and iron, and I didn't really feel like the game needed enough detail to differentiate between the various types of dairy, cow or goat, or which types of meat. They'll just be icons on the map, and they will be enums in your code that you can then use to have your actors make decisions. The wormhole, again, as mentioned, it is a wormhole that appears at a random interval determined by the game host. The Frontier will exchange heroes and will actually move the link definition between those actors so that it will get swapped. What that means is that the actors will be able to be physically transported so that you'll be able to run them in your machine even if you didn't write them, even when the original author may be offline. I don't really call that requirement out too clearly in this slide, but it's definitely one of the key design points. And this is the concept of tagging an actor as a singularity may or may not go. I'm not sure how I feel about this at the moment, but if you tag, and by tagging, I mean when you sign your actor with claims, which is another common wasmCloud activity, you can add tags, and if you add the tag of singularity to one of your heroes, then the wormhole will, in theory, ignore that actor and not swap it. Again, that particular gameplay mechanic I'm not sure about. I may just ditch that entirely. We'll see what happens when I get there. Game rules for building. We don't really have too many structures. Again, build just enough to get started. You can build fences out of wood, you build bulwarks out of iron, and you build pit traps by digging holes in the ground, filling them with water, and also using wood for the pit trap. So these are all structures that your code can create by using the various methods in the Actor SDK. So what do you do next? The first thing you can do is contact us, reach out to us on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @KevinHoffman. You can also reach out to @wasmCloud. The wasmCloud GitHub org is a good place to go. The wasmCloud documentation is a great place to go to learn about wasmCloud itself. And if you send us a DM or mention us on Twitter, then we can throw you an invite to our Slack if you want. We also have weekly wasmCloud community meetings that take place on Wednesdays. And of course, we'd like you to follow the game's progress by watching Twitter, and if we have a YouTube playlist, then we'll put that up there as well. And as always, we would like you to become a wasmCloud open source contributor. So if there's an area of the wasmCloud host runtime that you want to contribute to, then please, by all means, reach out to us and get in touch. And that's about it for the first journal entry. Like I said, this is the first and could be the last, depending on whether anyone actually cares what I'm doing or not. And I will talk to you later.